Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we crack open complex topics and extract those crucial nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're plunging into the incredible inner workings of your own body. Have you ever wondered how it keeps humming along, perfectly fueled and at a stable 37 degrees Celsius? Whether you've just devoured a meal or maybe haven't eaten in hours, it's quite a physiological marvel.
It really is. Our deep dive today is all about understanding the body's sophisticated energy management and, well, its temperature control systems too. We'll track how nutrients become fuel or get stored away, uncover the hormones that act like master conductors, and see how your body adapts to everything from, say, intense exercise to just a chilly morning. And all of this comes straight from the foundational insights of Vander's human physiology.
Okay, so our mission here is to unravel these really intricate processes. We want to show you how your body effortlessly shifts from building up energy stores after a big meal to, tapping into those reserves when you're running on empty, all while maintaining that perfect internal thermostat. Get ready for some genuine aha moments about your own biology. Right, let's start with the basics. These two fundamental states your body cycles through every single day, the absorptive and postabsorptive states. You can think of them as your body's ancient rhythm, like a feast and famine cycle, perfected long before refrigerators and regular meal times.
That's a great way to put it. The absorptive state is that period when nutrients from your food are actively entering your bloodstream from the gut. Typically lasts, about 4 hours after an average meal. During this window, your body uses what it needs immediately for energy and then, very smartly, stores any surplus.
And then the other state kicks in.
Exactly. Once the digestive tract is empty, you shift into the post-absorptive state. Now, the body has to rely entirely on its own internal energy reserves. So during that absorptive state, the main energy suppliers, carbs, fats, proteins, they're all being processed. Carbohydrates mostly break down into glucose. A lot of this glucose gets used right away for energy, especially by your muscles. But any extra, well, that's either stored as glycogen, mainly in the liver and muscles, or, quite interestingly, it can be transformed into fat triglycerides in your adipose tissue and liver.
Hold on, so even if I'm careful about eating fat, eating too many carbs could still lead to gaining fat. That's important.
Precisely. The liver, it's like a packaging center. It takes these newly made triglycerides, bundles them up with cholesterol and proteins into what we call very low-density lipoproteins, or VLDLs,
Real deal, right.
and releases them into the blood. Now, these VLDLs, along with fats absorbed directly from your meal, are then broken down by an enzyme on blood vessel walls, especially near fat tissue. The resulting fatty bits are taken up by fat cells, your adipocytes, and rebuilt into triglycerides for storage. And here's a key detail. Adipocytes actually need some glucose metabolites to make the glycerol backbone for those triglycerides.
Okay, interesting. Now, speaking of fats or lipids, cholesterol gets talked about a lot. It's not for energy, you said, but vital for cell membranes, hormones. But we always hear about too much being bad, leading to things like atherosclerosis.
Yeah, and that's why cholesterol homeostasis, keeping it in balance, is so critical. Your body gets cholesterol in two ways. From your diet, think egg yolks, and by making it itself. Almost all your cells can synthesize it, but the liver and small intestine are the main producers. The liver is really the master regulator here. It makes cholesterol, removes it from the blood, puts it into bile, or converts it into bile salts for digestion. And it's clever, if you eat more cholesterol, your liver usually slows down its own production. It's a nice negative feedback loop.
And this is where the whole good and bad cholesterol thing comes in, right?
Exactly. Cholesterol doesn't just float around freely in your blood. It travels in these packages called lipoprotein complexes. Low-density lipoproteins, LDLs, they're often labeled bad. Why? Because they deliver cholesterol to cells all over the body. And if levels get too high, they can deposit cholesterol in arteries. But importantly, they are essential for delivering necessary cholesterol.
Okay, so not entirely bad then.
No, not entirely. In contrast, high-density lipoproteins, HDLs, are the good guys. They act like scavengers, picking up excess cholesterol from tissues in the blood and hauling it back to the liver to be dealt with, maybe excreted or recycled. So often, the ratio of LDL to HDL gives a better picture of cardiovascular risk than just the total cholesterol number.
Makes sense. What about the protein we eat during this absorptive state?
Good question. Absorbed amino acids are primarily used as building blocks to synthesize new proteins your body needs. Think enzymes, muscle proteins, plasma proteins made by the liver. But here's the thing. Your body doesn't really store excess amino acids as protein. If there are leftovers, they get their amino group removed, a process called deamination. What's left, these aikido acids, can then be used for energy, mainly by the liver, or converted into fatty acids, which then get stored as triglycerides. So back to fat storage again if there's too much.
Okay, so the absorptive state is all about using and storing. Then, once those incoming nutrients dwindle, the body flips the switch. Postabsorptive state. And you said the big challenge here is keeping the brain supplied with glucose.
Absolutely critical. Your central nervous system normally runs almost exclusively on glucose. So maintaining stable plasma glucose levels is job number one to prevent, well, neurological problems. The body has three main strategies during this post-absorptive state to keep blood glucose up. First, glycogenolysis. Your liver breaks down its stored glycogen back into glucose and releases it into the bloodstream. This is the first line of defense, but liver glycogen stores only last a few hours, maybe 4 or 5.
Only a few hours, okay.
Yeah. Skeletal muscle has glycogen too, but it holds on to it for its own use. It can release lactate, though, which the liver can then convert back into glucose. Clever recycling.
Oh.
Second, lipolysis. Triglycerides stored in your fat tissue get broken down into glycerol and fatty acids. That glycerol travels to the liver, and guess what? It gets converted into glucose.
More glucose production.
Exactly. And third, if the fasting continues, protein cannibalism. The body starts breaking down proteins, mainly from muscle tissue, releasing amino acids. These amino acids head to the liver where they undergo gluconeogenesis. That literally means the creation of new glucose from non-carb sources. This new glucose is then released into the blood.
Wow, so the body becomes a real glucose factory when needed, using fat components and even protein to make sure the brain gets fed. That's amazing.
It is. And to make sure that precious newly made glucose is saved for the brain, most other tissues in your body switch their fuel source. They enter a state called glucose sparing. They dramatically decrease how much glucose they use and start burning fatty acids instead. And during prolonged fasting, they can also use ketones.
Ketones, like in keto diets.
Precisely. The liver produces ketones from fatty acids when glucose is scarce. These ketones are an important alternative fuel, especially for the nervous system, significantly reducing the brain's dependence on glucose during extended fasting.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. We know the body shifts gears between storing and burning fuel, but how does it know when? What's the signal? It sounds like a complex control system.
It absolutely is. It's like a finely tuned orchestra, conducted mainly by hormones. And the most important conductors, the lead players, are two hormones produced in the pancreas in specific clusters of cells called the islets of Langerhans. These are insulin and glucagon. They often have opposite effects, working together in a beautiful push-pull system to keep things balanced. It's a classic example of multiple regulatory systems controlling one vital function, in this case, primarily blood glucose.
Insulin first, then. That's the one most people have heard of.
Right. Insulin is secreted by the beta cells in the pancreas, and it's arguably the single most important hormone controlling your overall organic metabolism. Its levels rise significantly during the absorptive state right after you eat. Insulin's main targets are muscle cells, fat cells, adiposes, and liver cells. Think of it as the key that unlocks the door for glucose to enter these cells. It does this largely by triggering special glucose transporters, called GLUT4, to move to the cell membrane. Besides letting glucose in, insulin also promotes storage. It encourages glycogen synthesis, fat synthesis, and protein synthesis. And importantly, it tells the liver to stop making and releasing glucose.
But wait, you mentioned earlier the brain doesn't need insulin to take up glucose. That seems like a really crucial design feature.
It absolutely is. Brain cells have different glucose transporters that are not insulin dependent. This ensures the brain gets a continuous supply of glucose even when insulin levels are low, like during fasting. This is a vital safeguard.
Makes sense. So what triggers insulin release? Just sugar in the blood?
An increase in plasma glucose after a meal is the primary stimulus, yes. It creates a direct negative feedback loop. High glucose triggers insulin. Insulin lowers glucose, but it's amplified. Hormones called incretins like GLP-1 and GIP are released from your gut almost as soon as you start eating, anticipating the coming glucose surge and boosting insulin release. The parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, also stimulates insulin. Conversely, the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, and the hormone epinephrine actually inhibit insulin secretion. You don't want to be storing fuel when you need to run from danger.
Okay, so insulin is the storage hormone. What about its counterpart, glucagon?
Glucagon is secreted by the alpha cells of the pancreas, and it's insulin's main opponent. Its levels increase during the post-absorptive state when blood glucose starts to fall. Glucagon's major actions are in the liver. It stimulates glycogen breakdown, glycogenolysis, ramps up new glucose production, gluconeogenesis, and encourages the synthesis of ketones. All of these actions work together to increase plasma glucose and ketone concentrations, preventing hypoglycemia or low blood sugar.
So blood sugar drops, glucagon gets released, tells the liver make more sugar, and levels come back up. It's this constant dynamic balancing act.
That's it, exactly. The main trigger for glucagon secretion is a decrease in plasma glucose. It's also stimulated by amino acids. Interesting, right? Maybe to prevent hypoglycemia after a high-protein, low-carb meal. And the sympathetic nervous system stimulates glucagon too, making sure energy is available quickly during stress.
Are there other hormones involved in this counterregulation besides glucagon?
Oh yes. Several others also oppose insulin's actions, especially when blood glucose is low or during stress. Epinephrine, which is adrenaline, along with direct sympathetic nerve signals, is a powerful stimulator. Epinephrine hits both the liver and muscles to break down glycogen, boosts gluconeogenesis in the liver, and stimulates lipolysis fat breakdown in adipose tissue. It activates a key enzyme there called hormone-sensitive lipase, HSL. Basically, it mobilizes fuel fast.
Right, so when you're stressed or maybe exercising hard, epinephrine is really cranking up the fuel supply.
Precisely. Then you have cortisol. It's a glucocorticoid hormone from the adrenal cortex, often called the stress hormone. It plays what we call a permissive role. This means that its normal baseline levels are actually required for gluconeogenesis and lipolysis to happen effectively during the postabsorptive state. Glucagon and epinephrine need cortisol around to do their jobs properly. At higher concentrations, like during prolonged stress, cortisol actively decreases the sensitivity of muscle and adipose cells to insulin. This helps sears glucose, making sure it's available primarily for the brain.
Interesting. So cortisol has both a baseline role and a more active role during stress.
Correct. And finally, growth hormone also has these anti-insulin or glucose counter-regulatory effects. It makes fat cells more responsive to breakdown signals, stimulates gluconeogenesis in the liver, and reduces insulin's ability to promote glucose uptake by muscle and fat tissue. So you see, it's a multi-layered system, ensuring that plasma glucose stays remarkably stable, especially when challenged.
But what happens if the system fails? If glucose drops too low despite all these checks and balances?
That condition is hypoglycemia, abnormally low plasma glucose. It can be dangerous. It might happen if there's too much insulin, maybe from a rare tumor, or if the counter-regulatory hormone systems aren't working right. The symptoms arise from two things: the body's response and the brain's lack of fuel. You might get an increased heart rate, sweating, nervousness. That's the sympathetic nervous system kicking in trying to raise glucose. But if it gets worse, the brain suffers directly. Headaches, confusion, difficulty speaking, loss of coordination, and in severe cases, seizures, coma, and even death can result. It underscores just how vital stable glucose levels are for the brain.
Okay, let's connect this to when our energy demands really soar, like during exercise or, as you mentioned, significant stress. What's happening inside then?
Yeah, during exercise, the body's fuel mobilization goes into overdrive. Huge amounts of energy are needed, especially by the working muscles. So the liver dramatically increases its glucose output, both from breaking down glycogen and making new glucose. And adipose tissue ramps up lipolysis, releasing fatty acids and glycerol into the blood. The hormonal picture looks very much like the postabsorptive state, or even an intensified version of it. You see decreased insulin, but increased glucagon, sympathetic nervous system activity, epinephrine, cortisol, and growth hormone. All hands on deck to provide fuel.
But hang on, you said insulin is low during exercise, yet muscles need a lot of glucose when they're working hard. How do they get it inside without much insulin? That seems like a contradiction.
That is a fantastic point, and it highlights a really elegant piece of physiology. While circulating insulin is low, the actual process of muscle contraction independently triggers the movement of those GLUT4 glucose transporters to the muscle cell membrane.
Ah, so the muscle activity itself opens the glucose stores.
Exactly. It even stimulates the synthesis of more GLUT4 transporters. So exercising muscle can take up glucose at a very high rate, even with low insulin levels. This insulin-independent pathway is a major reason why exercise is so incredibly beneficial for people with type 2 diabetes, as it helps bypass their insulin resistance. And interestingly, the body's response to various non-specific stresses, physical injury, severe cold, prolonged emotional stress, chemically mimics this exercise profile. It's an adaptive fight or flight response designed to make energy readily available, not just for immediate activity, but also potentially for tissue repair if needed. Priority shift.
Fascinating how the body prepares for challenge on a metabolic level. So with all this energy being used and transformed, how do scientists actually measure it? How do we quantify energy expenditure?
We measure it as metabolic rate, which is simply the total energy expenditure per unit of time. Energy in the body ultimately gets converted into one of three things: internal heat, external work, like lifting something, or it gets stored. A surprising amount, actually about 60% of the energy released from breaking down food molecules, is immediately lost as heat during the chemical reactions. Only about 40% is captured as ATP to do work.
60% just as heat. Wow.
Yeah. Now, to compare metabolic rates between people, we often use a standardized measure called the basal metabolic rate, or BMR. BMR is measured under very specific conditions. The person is at rest, lying down, completely relaxed, in a comfortable temperature environment, and crucially, in the postabsorptive state, usually after an overnight fast, so digestion isn't affecting the rate. It basically represents the metabolic cost of living, the energy your vital organs need just to function.
And lots of things can affect your personal BMR, right? It's not the same for everyone.
Absolutely not. BMR varies significantly based on age. It tends to decrease with age. Gender, males generally have higher BMR due to more muscle mass, body size and composition, and even factors like fasting or starvation, which can lower it. Hormones play a big role too. Thyroid hormone, T3, is probably the single most important long-term determinant of BMR. It increases oxygen consumption and heat production in most tissues. This is called its calorogenic effect.
Ah, the thyroid's role in metabolism.
Exactly. Epinephrine also has a calorogenic effect, boosting metabolic rate acutely. And even just eating a meal temporarily increases metabolic rate for a few hours as your body processes the food. We call that diet-induced thermogenesis, DIT. And of course, the biggest variable factor in daily energy expenditure is muscle activity. Any physical activity, whether it's planned exercise-associated thermogenesis, BT, or just subconscious fidgeting and maintaining posture called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, can dramatically increase your total energy expenditure, sometimes by several times your BMR.
Right, so we have energy coming in from food and energy going out through BMR, activity, heat loss. To maintain a stable body weight, those two sides have to balance, don't they?
That's the fundamental principle. The equation is simple. Energy from food intake must equal the sum of internal heat produced, external work performed, and any energy stored. Any excess energy intake beyond expenditure gets stored, and the primary storage form is fat in adipose tissue. It's incredibly energy dense, remember. A gram of fat stores about 9 kilocalories, whereas carbs and protein only store about 4 kilocalories per gram.
So focusing just on the number on the scale might not tell the whole story about actual energy content changes, because weight includes water, muscle, bone.
Precisely. Body composition matters.
Right.
But generally, our body weight tends to be regulated around a fairly stable set point, though that set point can change over time. There's a fascinating adaptive mechanism. If your energy stores change significantly, say, you start eating a lot less, your body often reflexively decreases its energy expenditure, partly by lowering BMR to try and counteract the change and conserve energy.
Ugh, the dreaded weight loss plateau. That explains why it gets harder to keep losing weight sometimes. Your body fights back metabolically.
It does try to maintain equilibrium. This leads us to the controls over food intake itself. What makes us feel hungry and what tells us we're full.
Yeah, let's unpack that. Appetite versus hunger. Satiety.
We usually differentiate between appetite, which is more the psychological desire to eat specific foods, and hunger, which is the physiological drive to eat when energy is needed. Satiety is the feeling of fullness and satisfaction that tells us to stop eating. A key hormone involved in long-term regulation is leptin. It's produced by your fat cells, your adipocytes, generally in proportion to how much fat they're storing. Leptin travels to the brain, specifically the hypothalamus, and acts to decrease food intake and increase metabolic rate, partly by inhibiting appetite-stimulating pathways. It's essentially a signal from your fat stores saying, hey, we're pretty full down here. It's a crucial negative feedback loop.
So more fat means more leptin, which should mean less hunger and a higher metabolism.
That's the basic idea, yes. But it's not the only signal. Short-term satiety signals, operating meal to meal, are also critical. These include things like the stretching of your stomach, the presence of nutrients in the gut triggering hormonal responses, like the hormone cholecystokinin, CCK, increased plasma insulin levels, increased glucose utilization in specific brain areas, and even that slight rise in body temperature from diet-induced thermogenesis.
Lots of signals saying, okay, stop eating now.
Exactly. But then there's the other side, what makes you start eating or feel hungry. A major player here is ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone released primarily from the stomach, especially when it's empty. It travels to the brain and actively stimulates appetite pathways, increasing feelings of hunger. Ghrelin levels typically rise before meals and fall afterwards. They also tend to increase during fasting or on a low-calorie diet, making it harder to stick to restrictions.
Ah, ghrelin, the hunger hormone. So you've got leptin saying stop long term and ghrelin saying eat now short term, plus all those other satiety signals. It's complex.
It's incredibly complex, involving multiple hormones, neural pathways, and integration centers in the brain.
Given this complexity, it's maybe not surprising that the balance can get disrupted, leading to widespread issues like overweight and obesity.
Yes, these are major public health challenges. Clinically, overweight is typically defined by a body mass index, BMI, between 25 and 29.9 kilometer remittances, while obesity is a BMI of 30 kilometer remittances or greater. These conditions significantly increase the risk for many chronic diseases: hypertension, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers. The list is long.
Though BMI has its limits, right? It doesn't account for muscle mass or where the fat is located.
That's a crucial caveat. BMI is a screening tool, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Someone very muscular might have a high BMI without having excess fat. And we know that fat distribution matters. Abdominal fat or visceral fat seems to carry higher health risks than fat stored elsewhere.
What drives obesity? Is it just genetics or lifestyle?
It's almost always a combination. Genetic factors definitely play a role. Studies on twins and families show a hereditary component. Some people might inherit thrifty genes that were advantageous in environments where food was scarce, promoting efficient fat storage. However, the dramatic increase in obesity rates over recent decades suggests that genetics alone can't be the full explanation. Environmental and lifestyle factors readily available, high-calorie foods, reduced physical activity, psychological factors, cultural influences are clearly major contributors. And intriguingly, many individuals with obesity exhibit what's called leptin resistance. Their fat cells are producing plenty of leptin, maybe even high levels, but the brain cells that should respond to it aren't listening properly. It's somewhat analogous to insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes. The stop eating signal isn't getting through effectively.
So just telling someone to eat less might not work if their brain isn't getting the right satiety signals. And we already mentioned the metabolic rate slowing down.
Exactly. That's why simply prescribing drastic calorie cuts or crash diets often leads to rebound weight gain. The body defends its set point. The most successful long-term strategies usually involve a more sustainable approach. Moderate, consistent changes in dietary intake combined with, crucially, increased physical activity. Exercise not only burns calories directly, but also helps counteract the drop in metabolic rate that often accompanies weight loss, and it improves insulin sensitivity. It helps nudge the body towards a healthier equilibrium.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now. We've talked a lot about energy, but the body also has this incredible ability to maintain its internal temperature within a very tight range, thermoregulation. This isn't just about feeling comfortable, is it?
Not at all. It's absolutely vital for survival. Thermoregulation is the process of maintaining core body temperature within that narrow homeostatic range. Humans are endotherms. We generate our own heat internally through metabolic processes. And we're also homeotherms. We keep our internal temperature relatively constant, typically around 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 Fahrenheit, even when the outside temperature changes dramatically. Why is this stability so important? Because enzymes, the catalysts for almost all chemical reactions in our body, work optimally within a very specific temperature range. If core temperature deviates too much, nerve function can be impaired, and proteins can actually start to unravel or denature. A core body temp reaching about 43 degrees C, around 109 degrees F, is generally considered the upper limit compatible with life.
37 degrees is the average, but it does fluctuate a little, right?
Yes. While the core temperature is tightly regulated, there are normal variations. Rectal temperature is usually a bit higher than oral temperature. There is also a natural circadian rhythm, with body temperature typically lowest in the early morning hours and highest in the evening, varying by about 1 degree C over the day. Women also experience a slight temperature increase during the second half of their menstrual cycle due to the hormone progesterone. But overall, the body works hard to balance heat gain and heat loss constantly, following basic physical principles.
So how does that heat exchange actually happen? How do we gain or lose heat to the environment?
There are 4 main physical mechanisms. 1. Radiation. All objects above absolute zero emit thermal energy as electromagnetic waves. If your body's surface is warmer than surrounding objects, walls, furniture, you lose heat to them. If objects around you are warmer, like the sun or a hot fireplace, you gain heat from them via radiation. 2. Conduction. This is heat transfer through direct physical contact between objects of different temperatures. Heat flows from warmer to cooler. Touching a cold surface loses heat. Touching a hot one gains heat. Water conducts heat much better than air.
Right. That's why getting wet makes you feel colder much faster.
Exactly. 3. Convection. This is essentially conduction enhanced by the movement of the fluid, air or water, next to the body. As air near your skin gets warmed by conduction, it becomes less dense and rises, replaced by cooler air. This continuous movement carries heat away. Wind or a fan dramatically increases convected heat loss. 4. Evaporation. This is the conversion of liquid water into water vapor, which requires a significant amount of heat energy. When water evaporates from your skin surface, sweat, or respiratory tract lining, it draws that heat from your body, cooling you down. This is a very effective way to lose heat, especially when the environmental temperature is higher than body temperature. It includes both insensible water loss, which happens constantly without us noticing, and active sweating.
Okay, so radiation, conduction, convection, evaporation. How does the body control these processes to regulate temperature?
Through sophisticated reflex pathways, we have thermoreceptors, specialized nerve endings, sensitive to temperature located both in the skin, partial thermoreceptors, and deep within the body, including the spinal cord and brain, central thermoreceptors. The skin receptors provide early warning or feed-forward information about the external environment, while the central ones, especially those in the hypothalamus region of the brain, monitor the core body temperature itself, providing crucial negative feedback. The hypothalamus acts as the primary integrating center, the body's thermostat. It compares the incoming temperature information to the internal set point, around 37 degrees C. Based on this comparison, it sends out commands via the nervous system specifically. Sympathetic nerves going to sweat glands and the smooth muscle and skin blood vessels, and motor neurons going to skeletal muscles.
So let's say I step out into the cold. What's the immediate physiological response orchestrated by the hypothalamus?
Okay, core temperature starts to drop, or the skin receptors signal cold. The hypothalamus initiates responses to increase heat production and decrease heat loss. To increase heat production, it can trigger increased skeletal muscle tone, leading eventually to shivering thermogenesis. These are rapid, involuntary, oscillating muscle contractions that don't produce useful work but generate a lot of heat. In infants, non-shivering thermogenesis in specialized brown fat tissue is also important, using unique proteins to generate heat directly instead of ATP. To decrease heat loss, the sympathetic nervous system causes vasoconstriction, narrowing of the blood vessels in the skin. This reduces blood flow to the body surface, keeping warmer blood closer to the core and minimizing heat loss via radiation and convection. Behaviorally, we might curl up to reduce surface area or put on more clothes.
And if I get too hot,
Yeah.
say exercising on a warm day,
The opposite happens. The hypothalamus detects rising core temperature. It signals for vasodilation of skin blood vessels, widening them to bring more warm blood to the surface, promoting heat loss to the environment. Simultaneously, it activates sweat glands via sympathetic nerves. Sweat is secreted onto the skin, and as it evaporates, it carries away a large amount of heat, cooling the body very effectively. Of course, the effectiveness of sweating depends heavily on the humidity of the surrounding air. If the air is already saturated with water vapor, sweat can't evaporate easily, making it much harder to cool down. That's why humid heat feels so much more oppressive.
and our bodies can actually get better at handling heat or cold over time, can't they? Acclimatization.
Yes, that's temperature acclimatization. If you move to a consistently hot environment over days to weeks, your body adapts. You typically start sweating sooner, produce a larger volume of sweat for better cooling, and very importantly, the sweat becomes much more dilute, meaning you lose less salt, sodium chloride. This salt conservation is driven partly by increased aldosterone secretion and is vital for preventing electrolyte depletion during prolonged heat exposure and sweating. Cold acclimatization is also thought to occur, though it's generally less pronounced in humans and involves a mix of metabolic and insulative adjustments, plus behavioral changes.
All this talk about precise regulation glucose, temperature really highlights what can happen when these systems go wrong. The chapter we're drawing from uses diabetes mellitus as a key clinical example, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a perfect illustration of disrupted metabolic homeostasis. Diabetes mellitus is fundamentally characterized by hyperglycemia, abnormally high plasma glucose levels. This results either from the body not producing enough insulin or from the body's cells not responding properly to the insulin that is produced. Diagnosis often relies on measuring fasting plasma glucose, or a test called HbA1c, glycated hemoglobin, which gives an indication of average blood glucose control over the preceding few months.
And there are different types, primarily type 1 and type 2.
Correct. Type 1 diabetes mellitus, T1DM, accounts for maybe 5–10% of cases. It's an autoimmune disease. The body's own immune system mistakenly identifies the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas as foreign and destroys them. This leads to an absolute deficiency of insulin. Without insulin, Glucose cannot easily enter most cells, except the brain, remember?
So glucose piles up in the blood, but the cells are effectively starving for it.
Exactly. And because the cells aren't getting glucose and there's no insulin signal to snipe it, the body thinks it's starving. It ramps up counter-regulatory processes. The liver churns out even more glucose, gluconeogenesis, and fat breakdown, lipolysis, goes into overdrive. This massive fat breakdown produces huge amounts of ketones. The combination of severe hyperglycemia and excessive ketones leads to a dangerous state called diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA. The ketones make the blood acidic, which can disrupt all sorts of bodily functions. Furthermore, the extremely high blood glucose overwhelms the kidney's ability to reabsorb it, so glucose spills into the urine. Glucose in the urine pulls water with it by osmosis. This is osmotic diuresis. This causes excessive urination, severe dehydration, loss of electrolytes like sodium, low blood pressure, and can ultimately impair brain function. It's a life-threatening emergency if not treated promptly with insulin and fluids.
That sounds incredibly serious. What about type 2? That's the
Yeah.
more common one, right?
Yes, type 2 diabetes mellitus, T2DM, accounts for the vast majority of cases and is strongly associated with being overweight or obese, and often develops gradually in adulthood, though we're seeing it more in younger people now too. T2DM is primarily characterized by insulin resistance. Insulin is being produced, at least initially, sometimes even in excess, but the target cells, particularly muscle, fat, and liver cells, don't respond properly to its signal. They're resistant. Over time, the beta cells may also become exhausted trying to compensate for this resistance, and their ability to secrete insulin can decline, further worsening glucose control.
And the link with obesity, is it that excess fat tissue somehow causes the insulin resistance?
That's a major part of the picture, yes. Adipose tissue, especially excess visceral fat, is now understood to be metabolically active, releasing various signaling molecules,
Right.
adipokines, that can interfere with insulin signaling in other tissues, promoting insulin resistance. Unlike T1DM, severe weight loss and DKA are less common in the early stages of T2DM, partly because there's still some insulin around, which prevents runaway ketone production. However, the chronic hyperglycemia still poses significant risks. The insulin resistance itself, often linked to obesity, creates a cycle where weight gain can worsen resistance, and resistance makes weight management harder.
Which is why the management for T2DM often focuses on lifestyle changes. First, weight loss, diet, and especially exercise. Because we learned exercise helps muscles take up glucose even without perfect insulin signaling.
Precisely. Lifestyle modifications are foundational. Weight reduction can significantly improve insulin sensitivity. Exercise has direct beneficial effects on glucose uptake. Medications might also be needed. Some help increase insulin secretion. Others improve sensitivity to existing insulin. Some affect glucose absorption or production. But the bottom line for both types of diabetes is that chronically elevated plasma glucose is damaging. Over years, it contributes to serious long-term complications by altering proteins and damaging blood vessels and nerves. This includes accelerated atherosclerosis, heart attacks, strokes, kidney failure, nephropathy, nerve damage, neuropathy causing things like tingling or pain, and eye damage leading to blindness, retinopathy. Managing blood glucose effectively is crucial to delaying or preventing these devastating outcomes. Hashtag outro. So, pulling it all together, what this deep dive really underscores is the incredible precision and also the built-in redundancy of our body's control systems. Think about the minute-by-minute regulation of blood glucose by insulin and glucagon working in opposition, or the complex interplay balancing energy intake and expenditure over the long term, or the constant adjustments needed to maintain core temperature. These systems are perpetually active, working tirelessly to maintain homeostasis, that stable internal environment, which is just fundamental for health and ultimately for survival. And the example of diabetes really drives home the profound system-wide consequences when these fundamental metabolic control mechanisms fail.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for you listening? Hopefully, understanding these internal processes, even at this level, isn't just, academic knowledge. It offers real insights into your own health, the impact of your choices regarding diet and activity, and just how remarkably resilient yet sometimes quite fragile our bodies truly are. It's a testament to the intricate, amazing biological machine we each carry around every day. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Given the body's truly remarkable capacity to adapt its metabolism and regulate its temperature across a range of conditions, what might be the ultimate limits of these homeostatic mechanisms? And perhaps more pointedly, how might our modern lifestyles with this unprecedented abundance of food, often highly processed, and our ability to live in perfectly climate-controlled environments, how might these factors be uniquely challenging these ancient biological systems in ways our ancestors, shaped by scarcity and variable conditions, never really faced?